I used to believe family was sacred. Then my son David forgot to press the end button after our weekly call, and I heard the truth. Did she fall for it? My granddaughter Iris's voice clear as day. Hook, line, and sinker, David replied, voice hardened with contempt. God, I'm tired of pretending to care about her stupid garden club. Once we get her to sign over the house, my grandson Tyler chimed in. We can dump her somewhere affordable. Then my son, my only child, laughed. Mom's too. Stupid to see what's really going on. I sat frozen at my kitchen table, teacup, halfway to my lips as 5 years of suspicious patterns suddenly crystallized into perfect, terrible clarity. That night, I blocked their numbers. Next morning, I canceled their credit cards. By week's end, I'd contacted my attorney. When they arrived at my door, panic-stricken and demanding explanations, I didn't answer. Family isn't about blood. At 78, I'm finally living for myself, painting my sunrise. Lit apartment in colors of my own choosing. Before we continue, subscribe for more stories that speak to the silent strength in all of us. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Have you ever discovered someone's true feelings when they thought you weren't listening? Share your story in the comments below. How did you respond to unexpected betrayal? I remember the day everything changed like it was yesterday. I was sitting at my kitchen table sipping chamomile tea when my phone rang. It was my son David calling for our weekly check-in. At 78, I'd grown used to these pre-functor calls. They weren't warm exactly, but they were regular, a connection to the family. Rarely saw any more hello, David. I answered, trying to keep the eagerness from my voice. Hey, Mom, he replied, his voice distracted as always. How are you feeling today? We chatted about nothing. Really, the weather, my garden club, his children's latest achievements. It was pleasant enough surface level. Conversation that we'd perfected over the years. I told him about the new roses I'd planted, how Mrs. Abernathy from 2 doors down had complimented my front yard. He made appropriate noises of interest, though I could hear him typing on his computer in the background. And how are the paintings coming along? He asked a question he always remembered to include, though he hadn't actually seen any of my watercolors in over a year. Oh, just lovely. I said, I'm working on a series of landscapes from the park. The art teacher says, I have a good eye for composition. That's great, Mom. Really? Great. The silence that followed felt heavy, expectant. I filled it, as I always did, with questions about his work, about Natalie, about the grandchildren. He answered each with increasing brevity. Life had become so quiet since Hector passed. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to grow louder with each passing year I'd taken to leaving the television on, just for background noise, though I rarely watched it. The garden club meetings on Tuesdays and my watercolor class on Thursdays were the highlights of my week, right? Spots of human connection in the stretching emptiness of my days. My small rancher was tidy and comfortable, but sometimes in the evenings I'd find myself wandering from room to room, touching Hector's things, his reading, glasses still on the nightstand, his favorite sweater I couldn't bear to give away. The silence would press in, and I'd put on one of our old records, dancing alone in the living room to the songs we used to sway to together. Mom, are you still there? David's voice pulled me back to the present. Yes, sorry, dear. Just thinking about what to make for dinner. You're eating properly, right? Not just tea and toast. Of course, I lied. Sometimes. It hardly seemed worth the effort to cook for one. Goodwill, I should get going. Conference call in 5 minutes. Of course, dear, same time next week. Sure thing, Mom, take care of yourself. The call ended, and I sat there holding the phone for a long moment afterward, as if some warmth might still emanate from it. Some connection to my only child. I sighed and returned to my tea, now lukewarm outside. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across my small garden. Another day nearly done. I hadn't always been this lonely. There was a time when this house, well, not this house, but our home had been filled with laughter and noise. Sunday dinners with David, Natalie, and the grandchildren had been chaotic. Affairs with Hector at the grill and everyone talking over each other. Iris had been such a sweet child always, bringing me dandelions from the yard, and Tyler had followed his grandfather around like a devoted puppy, learning how to use tools and fix things. But that was before the cancer took Hector. Before the silence descended, before my family became voices on a telephone rather than bodies around my table. I rinsed my teacup in the sink and glanced at the calendar on the wall. Garden club tomorrow. Something to look forward to. At least I'd wear my blue cardigan, the one Zinea said brought out my eyes. Maybe afterward, we'd get lunch at that little cafe on Main Street. My sister was good about checking in on me, though at 83 she had her own health concerns to manage. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. When had I gotten so old? The woman looking back at me had Hector's wedding ring on a chain around her neck, silver, hair in a neat bob, and eyes that had seen too much loss. I barely recognized myself sometimes, just you and me now. Whispered to my reflection, a habit I developed in the years since Hector's passing. Sometimes talking to myself was the only conversation I had all day. Hector's diagnosis had come like a thunderclap on a clear day, stage 4. Pancreatic cancer, 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. We'd been planning a cruise to Alaska for our 50th wedding anniversary. Instead, we spent those months in and out of hospitals learning medical terminology that no one should. Have to know, watching the strongest man I'd ever loved with her away before my eyes. David had been supportive at first, visiting regularly, bringing the grandchildren to cheer up their grandfather. Natalie had organized a meal, trained with their church group. But as the months dragged on and Hector's condition worsened, their visits became less frequent. The kids have school, they'd explain. Work is crazy right now. Understood. Life goes on, even when it feels like yours is standing still. The last few weeks, Hector was barely conscious, the morphine keeping the worst of the pain at bay. I slept in a chair beside his hospital bed, holding his hand, telling him stories about our life together, reminiscing about the day we met at that USO dance in '62. His uniform so crisp, my dress so blue. You were the prettiest girl there, he'd whispered during one of his lucid moments, his voice a shadow of the robust baritone I'd love still are when he finally slipped away. It was early morning. I was dozing in the chair, still holding his hand. I felt the change. Before I opened my eyes, some subtle shift in the universe as his soul departed. The nurse said it was peaceful. That he hadn't suffered at the end, I wanted to believe her. The funeral was well attended. Hector had been beloved in our community, volunteer firefighter for 30 years, league coach deacon at our church. David gave a beautiful eulogy. Natalie handled the reception afterward. The grandchildren, teenagers then seemed awkward around me, unsure what to say to a grandmother transformed overnight into a widow. Well, check on you every day, Mom. David promised as the last guest departed, you won't be alone in this. For a while, he kept that promise. Daily calls became every other day, then twice weekly, then settled into the Sunday afternoon ritual. The Sunday dinners continued for a few months, but gradually tapered off. Mom, we're taking the kids to the lake this weekend. Mom, Natalie's parents are in town. Mom, Tyler has a tournament, valid reasons, all of them. Life goes on. I rattled around in our big 2-story colonial A house meant for a family, not a solitary old woman. The stairs became increasingly difficult. With my arthritic knees, the yard work that Hector had loved became an overwhelming burden. The property taxes were eating into my fixed income. When David suggested I consider downsizing, it made practical sense. You don't need all this space, Mom, he said, gesturing around the living room where his childhood photos still adorned the walls. And the equity you've built up would give you a nice nest egg for retirement. The real estate market was strong that year. The house sold within a week, well above asking price. I found a charming single-story rancher in a quiet neighborhood with a manageable garden and no stairs to navigate. David helped with the move, organizing which furniture to keep, which to sell, which to donate. What are you planning to do with the proceeds from the house, he asked. As we sorted through Hector's tools in the garage, you should talk to a financial advisor. Make sure it's working for you. I hadn't really thought about it, I admitted. Put it in savings, I suppose. David frowned. That's not very strategic. Mom, interest rates are terrible right now. You should consider some investments. Maybe a reverse mortgage on the new place to free up more capital. I was touched by his concern for my financial well-being. I'll think about it, I promised. The move was exhausting but liberating in its way. Downsizing meant confronting a lifetime of accumulated possessions, deciding what was truly important to keep. I found myself crying over the strangest things. Hector's collection of matchbooks from restaurants we'd visited, the children's height marks on the kitchen door frame that couldn't be transported, the rose bushes he tended so carefully that had to be left behind. But my new home, though smaller, had its charms. A bay window, perfect for my reading chair, a kitchen with updated appliances that made cooking for once slightly less depressing, a garden shed that I converted into a studio for my painting. I settled into a new routine, a new chapter of life I'd never planned for but had to embrace. Nonetheless, David seemed relieved once I was settled. This is much more manageable for you, Mom, he said, surveying the compact living space. And if you ever need help, we're just a phone call away. I believed him, then I had no reason not to. The first hint that something might be amiss came about 6 months after I'd moved into the rancher. David called on a Tuesday. Instead of our usual Sunday, Mom, I've been thinking, he began without preamble. Have you updated your will since Dad passed? The question caught me off guard. No, I haven't gotten around to it. Why do you ask? It's just good practice, he said smoothly, making sure everything's in order. I have a friend who's an attorney who specializes in elder law. He could help you streamline everything, make sure your wishes are clear, elder law. I repeated, somewhat taken aback by the term. I'm not elderly, David, I'm just experienced. He laughed, but it sounded forced. Of course, Mom. But it's still smart to have everything in order. I could set up an appointment if you'd... Like I demurred, saying I'd think about it. The conversation left me vaguely unsettled, though. I couldn't quite put my finger on why. A week later, Natalie called something she rarely did. Just checking in on my favorite mother-in-law, she said brightly. David mentioned you might be feeling a bit under the weather. Did he? I was perfectly fine. Hadn't mentioned any health concerns during our last call. Oh, maybe I misunderstood. How? Are you feeling, taking all your medications properly, eating well? The questions continued, probing into my daily routine, my health, my finances in a roundabout way. By the end of the call, I felt like I'd been interviewed rather than engaged in a conversation with family. Then the grandchildren started. Appearing Iris, now 22, showed up unannounced one afternoon, all smiles and flattery. Grandma, you look amazing. I love what you've done with your hair. We had tea in the garden, catching up on her life. She dropped out of community college, was between jobs, as she put it, trying to find herself. As she was leaving, she hesitated at the door. Grandma, I hate to ask, but I'm in a bit of a tight spot financially just until I get back on my feet. Could you maybe help me out? $5,000 would cover my rent and expenses for a few months while I job hunt. $5,000 was a significant sum, but she was my granddaughter and she looked so much like David had at that age, with Hector's eyes and my stubborn chin. I wrote the check, feeling a warm glow of being needed, being useful to my family. 2 weeks later, I saw her in town. Shopping bags from expensive boutiques hanging from her arms, a new hairstyle that must have cost hundreds. She didn't see me watching from across the street. Tyler was next arriving with a business proposal rather than a direct request. At 25, he had his father's confidence and charm. It's a tech startup, Grandma, he explained, showing me glossy printouts with graphs and projections. We're developing an app that's going to revolutionize how people shop for groceries. The potential return on investment is huge. That sounds very impressive, I said, though I understood little of the technical jargon he used, but I don't know anything about investing in startups. That's why you have me, he said, patting my hand. Wouldn't steer my favorite grandma wrong. 10. London gets you in at the ground floor. You could double your money within a year. Again, I wrote the check, telling myself it was an investment in my grandson's future as much as my own 6. Months later, when I casually asked David how Tyler's business was doing, he looked momentarily confused. Oh, that it didn't work out. These things happen in the startup world. High risk, high reward. And next time I saw Tyler, he was driving a new sports car. Around this time, I met Milos at a community center dance for seniors. He asked me to dance to a Frank Sinatra song, and his old world charm was immediately captivating. He was 75, a retired engineer who'd immigrated from Serbia in his 30s. His accent was still thick, his eyebrows bushier than seemed possible, and his laugh was infectious. You dance like a much younger woman, he told me as we swayed to the music. Like a spring breeze, no one had flirted with me in years. I felt a blush creep up. My neck felt young again in a way I hadn't since Hector's diagnosis. Milos asked for my number and I gave it. Without hesitation, our first date was to a matinee at the old theater downtown, followed by coffee at a cafe where he knew the owner, another Serbian expatriate who treated us to homemade pastries. Milos told me about his late wife, about his children who lived on the West Coast, about his life in Belgrade before coming to America. I told him about Hector, about my painting, about my garden. We discovered a shared love of classical music and historical documentaries. He became a regular fixture in my life. Museum visits on Wednesdays, dinner at his condo or my house on Saturdays. Occasional day trips to coastal towns I'd never explored despite living so close. For the first time since Hector died, I felt truly alive again, seen for who I was rather than defined by my widowhood. When I mentioned Milos to David during one of our calls, his reaction was immediate and concerning. Mom, you barely know this guy. How much have you told him about your finances? Nothing, I said, taken aback. Why would we talk about art and music and travel? Not money. You need to be careful, David insisted. There are a lot of scammers out there who target seniors. Lonely widows with savings are prime targets. Milos isn't like that, I protested. He owns his condo outright, has a good pension from his engineering career. He's not interested in my money, but David's warning planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't quite shake. The next time Milos and I had dinner, I found myself watching for signs of deception, for hints that his interest in me might be financially motivated. There were none. but the doubt remained a small shadow on my happiness. Meanwhile, my sister Zinea had been observing the increasing involvement of my family in my life with growing concern. They never visited this much when Hector was alive, she remarked during one of our weekly lunches. Now, suddenly, they're all so interested in your well-being. Their family, I said defensively. They care about me, Zinaya 5. Years my senior, but twice as sharp, gave me a look that said she wasn't convinced. Just be careful, Viv. Not everyone has your best interests at heart, even family. I dismissed her concerns as the natural cynicism of age. But as the months passed, a pattern began to emerge that was increasingly difficult to ignore. David and Natalie's reaction to Milos went from concerned to actively hostile. They began dropping by unannounced when they knew he would be visiting, creating awkward situations where he would politely excuse himself. We just worry about you, Mom, David would say after Milos left. You don't really know this. Man, he's kind and respectful. We enjoy each other's company. I insisted. Men his age are only interested in one thing, Natalie added, and it's not conversation. I was shocked. I'm 78 years old. I think I'm past being taken advantage of that way. The comments continued, subtle digs about his accent, background, and intentions. David would call whenever Milos and I had plans suddenly needing urgent help. Natalie would schedule lunches that conflicted with our outings, forcing me to choose. When David finally suggested my relationship with this foreigner disrespected Hector's memory, I broke down. Your father would want me to be happy, I said through tears. Dad would want you to be safe. David countered. I chose peace over happiness and ended things with Milos. The hurt in his eyes was unbearable. They are wrong about me, he said quietly. But I understand family is important. If you change your mind, know where to find me. With Milos gone, my world contracted to my home garden, club, and increasingly demanding family. The grandchildren's visits always ended with requests: money for car repairs, graduate school applications, security deposits. I gave what I could, telling myself this was what grandmothers did. Natalie began admiring my possessions during visits: Hector's pearl necklace gift, my mother's silver tea service, our Waterford crystal wedding vase. This would look perfect in our dining room, she would say, holding each treasure bit by bit. My precious possessions migrated to their home. I rationalized it. They would inherit these things. Eventually, David's hints about financial difficulties became more direct. Tyler's tuition is stretching us thin. The house needs a new roof. I began writing checks for their expenses, each time receiving less gratitude and facing more expectation. Zinea watched with alarm. Viv, they're bleeding you dry, she said bluntly. When was the last time they visited without asking for something? Their family. I repeated like a mantra: family helps each other, family doesn't. Take advantage, she countered. Hector would be furious. I changed the subject. But in quiet moments alone in my increasingly bare house, I wondered if she might be right. The months following my breakup with Milos were intensely lonely. I threw myself into painting, spending hours in my garden shed studio, expressing emotions I couldn't voice. David's calls increased, always ending with financial matters. Maybe we should consolidate your accounts. Mom, Natalie, and I could help manage things, I began. Feeling I was disappointing them by maintaining independence, Natalie started monitoring my medication, suggesting needed help remembering pills, or perhaps someone to check on you daily. I'm perfectly capable of taking my own medications, I insisted. There's no shame in accepting assistance at your age, she replied in a patronizing tone. The grandchildren's visits followed a pattern. Iris would compliment my baking. While explaining her latest crisis, I hate to ask Grandma, but I'm short on rent this month. Tyler would help with house repairs, then mention car trouble or credit card debt. Each time I wrote a check, feeling momentarily needed, but my savings dwindled while their circumstances improved. Kitchen renovations, new cars, European vacations. Tyler posted photos from Cancun. Iris arrived with designer handbags I cut. Back on luxuries, lunches with Zinea became monthly. I canceled my Symphony subscription, started shopping at discount stores. Zinea grew more direct with her warnings. They show up with empty hands and leave with full pockets. They're going through a rough patch, I defended weakly. Have they ever paid you back for anything? She challenged. The truth was, repayment had never been discussed. Money flowed one way, never to return. I began noticing the pattern. My family always arrived empty-handed, yet never left without something. The internal conflict became unbearable. Maternal instinct to provide warring with awareness of exploitation. I thought of Milos more often, remembering his blunt assessment. You are being, how do you say it, milked like cow. At the time I'd been offended. Now I wondered if he'd simply spoken a truth no one else would. One afternoon, I found a photograph of David as a child, proudly holding a fish he'd caught with Hector. His smile was genuine, his eyes bright with love. I stared at it, trying to reconcile that joyful boy with the calculating adult he'd become. The constant stress took a physical toll. Weight loss, insomnia, anxiety. When the phone rang, you look exhausted. Chinea said during a rare lunch, the situation is killing you by inches. I don't know what to do. I admitted. They're my only family besides you that doesn't give them the right to bleed you dry. Hector would never have allowed this. Hector isn't here, I said, and I'm not as strong as he was. Nonsense. You're every bit as strong. You just need to remember. Something shifted inside me. If they were using me, the fault wasn't mine. I hadn't failed as a mother. I was being exploited by people who valued money over family bonds. I began saying no to financial requests. I'm afraid I can't help with that right now. The reactions were telling confusion, then irritation, then anger. But Grandma, you've always helped before, Iris protested. My circumstances have changed. I need to be careful with my spending. The calls decreased. Visits nearly stopped David, however, became more persistent. Mom, are you feeling all right? Maybe we should stay a few days, help around the house. I deflected these offers while researching financial protections for seniors and consulting with Zanaya's lawyer friend. I was preparing for whatever would come next, either capitulating to their demands or forcing them to reveal their true intentions. It was a Wednesday afternoon when David called outside our usual schedule. I was in my studio working on a watercolor landscape when my phone rang. I considered letting it go. To voicemail, I was at a crucial point in the painting, trying to capture the exact quality of light through the trees. But years of maternal instinct won out. What if it was an emergency? Hello, David. I answered, trying to keep the weariness from my voice. Hey, Mom, he replied, his tone unusually upbeat. How are you? Feeling today we chatted about nothing really. The weather, my garden club, his children's latest achievements. It was pleasant enough surface-level conversation that we'd perfected over the years. But there was an undercurrent of anticipation in his voice, a barely contained excitement that made me uneasy. Finally, he came to the point. Oh, by the way, Mom, we're planning a special dinner next week for Tyler's birthday. You'll come, won't you? I was surprised by the invitation. It had been months since I'd been included in a family gathering. Of course, I said, genuinely pleased. What can I bring, just yourself? David said quickly. We're taking care of everything. It's at that new steakhouse downtown, the one Tyler's been wanting to try. That sounds lovely, I said, mentally calculating what I could afford for a gift. My budget was tighter these days, but a birthday was a birthday. Perhaps a nice shirt or a book on that historical period he'd been interested in recently. Oh, and Mom, David added, his voice taking on that particular tone I'd come to recognize, slightly hesitant, slightly apologetic. The prelude to a financial request. Hate to ask, but could you transfer about $300 to Natalie's account? The caterers need a deposit, and we're a bit short this month. I frowned, confused, I thought. You said it was at the steakhouse, right? Yes, he said quickly. They have a private room for parties. That's what needs the deposit. It didn't quite make sense. Restaurants typically held reservations with a credit card, not cash. Deposits, but I let it pass. Of course, Davy, I said, using his childhood. Nickname, I'll send it right now. Thanks, Mom. You're a gem. Love you too. Dear, I heard him move as if to hang up. But the call didn't end. Instead, I heard shuffling, then voices growing clearer as if he'd put the phone down without ending the call. Did she fall for it? That was Iris's voice, unmistakable, followed by a laugh that sent chills through me. Hook, line, and sinker. David replied, his voice completely different, hard-edged, contemptuous. God, I'm so tired of these calls pretending to care. About her stupid garden club meetings and those pathetic paintings she does. Well, keep it up. Natalie's voice now, sharp as glass. The birthday dinner will be perfect. She's been feeling left out lately, so she'll definitely come and bring a gift? Probably. Cash, you know how she is. Tyler timed in, clueless as always. And we can bring up the reverse mortgage idea again. Dad says with the right pressure, she'll cave. Yeah. Dad's smart. Iris agreed. Once we get her to sign over the house, we can move her into assisted living somewhere affordable. The family home is too valuable to waste on her. She doesn't need all that space, I heard. David again, his voice businesslike. We just need to be patient a little longer. The retirement account alone will set us all up nicely. Not to mention Hector's insurance money she hasn't touched. Should be used for family needs, not sitting in some account. Mom's too stupid to see what's really going on. Always has been. Just like Dad said, weak and easily manipulated. I sat frozen at my kitchen table, teacup halfway to my lips as 5 years of suspicious patterns suddenly crystallized into perfect, terrible clarity. The family I thought I had, the son I'd raised, the grand grandchildren I'd adored had been playing me for a fool. I was nothing to them but a checkbook, a resource to be drained and discarded. The revelation was like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. I ended the call with trembling fingers, but their laughter, their cruel words continued echoing in my mind. I sat there. As darkness fell, the teacup growing cold in my hands, processing the betrayal, working through stages of grief that felt horribly familiar, yet entirely different from when I'd lost Hector. This was a different kind of death. The death of illusions of the family I thought I had, of the love I'd believed in, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. It hurt in ways I hadn't known I could still be hurt. A pain that went beyond the physical into some realm of pure emotional anguish. What had I done to deserve such contempt? Had I been a terrible mother, a disappointing grandmother, or was this simply who they were, who they had always been beneath the veneer of familial affection? The questions swirled in my mind as night deepened around me, as the house grew quiet, safe for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Hector's clock, the one thing I'd insisted on bringing from our old home. The steady heartbeat of our life together. What would Hector do in this situation? The question came unbidden, but with it came a sense of clarity. Hector would not allow himself to be used this way. Hector would protect what we'd built. Together would ensure that our life's work wasn't squandered by those who didn't appreciate its value. Not just monetary value, but the value of the love and sacrifice it represented. As the first light of dawn filtered through the kitchen window, I knew what I had to do. Financial elder abuse often goes unreported because victims feel ashamed or afraid of losing family connections. If this story resonates with you, visit Away Over Glass.org for resources on protecting yourself or loved ones from exploitation. What would you do in Vivian's position? I spent that night in a state of suspended animation, barely moving from my kitchen chair as darkness fell and then gradually gave way to the gray light of dawn. The betrayal felt physical, a weight pressing on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. I compared this grief to losing Hector and found it both similar and profoundly different. When Hector died, I lost someone who loved me unconditionally. This was losing people I thought loved me, only to discover it had been conditional all along, conditional on what I could provide, what I could give, what I was worth to them in dollars and cents. The internal struggle was agonizing. These were not strangers who had deceived me. This was my son, my grandchildren, my daughter-in-law, the people I had loved, nurtured, sacrificed for. How could I reconcile the David who had sat by my hospital bed after my hip surgery, holding my hand and reading to me for hours, with the David who had called me stupid and weak behind my back? How could I square the memory of Iris as a little girl bringing me dandelion bouquets and handmade cards with the young woman who laughed at the thought of manipulating her grandmother? Part of me wanted to confront them immediately, to call David back and demand an explanation, to ask how they could treat me with such callous disregard. But another part, perhaps wiser, knew that confrontation would only lead to denials, to gaslighting, to being told I had misheard or misunderstood. No, this required a different approach. This required strategy, not emotion. This required me to be stronger than I had been in years. As the sun rose, fully casting long shadows across my kitchen floor, I made my decision. I would protect myself, my resources, my dignity. I would not allow them to take anything more from me, not my money, not my home, not my self-respect. The first call I made was to Xenia. Despite the early hours, she answered on the second ring, her voice alert. My sister had always been an early riser. Biv, is everything all right? No, I said simply, and then the words poured out of me. Everything I'd overheard, every cruel comment, every calculated plan to separate me from my assets. As I spoke, my voice grew steadier, my resolve stronger, naming the betrayal. Aloud, somehow diminished its power over me. Xenia was silent for a long moment after I finished. Then I'm coming over. Don't do anything until I get there. She arrived within the hour, bringing coffee and her trademark no-nonsense attitude at 83. My sister was still a force of nature, her white hair cut in a stylish bob, her posture military straight despite the arthritis that plagued her on rainy days. I should have listened to you, I said, tears finally flowing as she enveloped me in a fierce hug. You saw it all along. Doesn't matter now, she said briskly, setting down her purse and the cardboard tray of coffee cups. What matters is what we do next. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd received the devastating phone call and made a plan. Zenaya had always been the practical one, the strategist to my dreamer. Now her clarity of thought was exactly what I needed. First things first, she said, pulling out a notepad and pen from her purse. We need to protect your assets immediately. What access does David have to your accounts? I explained about the shared access I'd given him to monitor my accounts, the credit cards where I'd made them authorized users, the joint checking account we'd set up for emergencies. Zenaya made notes, her handwriting as precise as ever. All of that needs to be changed today, right now if possible. But what will I tell them? I asked still. Caught in the web of familial obligation, still worried about hurting their feelings despite everything. Nothing. Yet, Zenaya said firmly, we secure your finances first, then decide how to handle the confrontation. Viv, she said, taking my hands in hers, her blue eyes. So like mine, so like our mothers, holding my gaze steadily. Your kindness isn't weakness, it's their loss, not yours. We're going to fix this together. Her confidence in me was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. I clung to it, drawing strength from her certainty when my own was in tatters. Okay, I said, squaring my shoulders. Tell me what to do. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. First, I called my bank and canceled all the shared access I'd given David to monitor my accounts. The customer service representative was helpful but concerned, Mrs. Harmon. Are you sure you want to remove your son from all these accounts? He's been authorized for quite some time, I'm quite sure. Said firmly. In fact, I'd like to open entirely new accounts and transfer my funds there, and I'd like to change all my passwords and security questions. Next, I called the credit card companies where I'd made them authorized users and revoked their privileges. One representative asked if there had been fraudulent charges I wanted to report. No, I said after a moment's consideration. Not fraudulent exactly, just unauthorized. In spirit, if not in letter, I blocked their numbers on my phone, changed my email password, and made an appointment with my own attorney, not David's friend, who specialized in elder law, but Janet Kowalski, a sharp-minded woman in her 50s who had handled Zenaya's affairs for years. Financial exploitation of seniors is unfortunately common. Janet told me during our consultation, her expression sympathetic but professional even more. So when it's family members doing the exploiting, they have access, they have trust, and they often have a sense of entitlement to the senior's assets. What can I do to protect myself? I asked. Quite a lot, actually, she replied, pulling out a legal pad. We'll start by creating a revocable trust for your assets with clear provisions for your care. We'll update your will, removing David as executive and naming someone you trust. Implicitly, perhaps your sister. We'll set up a financial power of attorney and healthcare directive naming someone other than your son. And we'll document this conversation and the reasons for these changes in case there's ever a challenge to your competency. The implication was clear. David might claim I was mentally incompetent when he discovered he'd been cut off. The thought was both infuriating and deeply sad that my own son would question my sanity rather than acknowledge his own wrongdoing. Spoke volumes about how far our relationship had deteriorated. When the day of Tyler's birthday dinner arrived, I wasn't there. I sent no gift, no card, no explanation for my absence. Instead, I was touring retirement communities with Zenaya, not the affordable assisted living facility David had mentioned, but vibrant, active communities where I could have my independence and security. This one has an art studio for residents, the tour guide at Oakwood Village mentioned, showing us a bright, airy space with easels and a wall of completed paintings. Several professional artists live here, and they offer classes for all skill levels. I felt a spark of interest, the first positive emotion I'd experienced since the devastating phone call. Do they have exhibitions, gallery showings twice a year? The guide confirmed, and they partner with the community college for special workshops. Many residents find they have more time to pursue their artistic passions here. By the end of the day, I had put down a deposit on a one-bedroom apartment with a small den that could serve as a studio. The community had 24-hour security, a dining room for when I didn't feel like cooking, transportation to medical appointments and shopping, and most importantly, a sense of community that had been lacking in my life since Hector died. Are you sure about this? Zenaya asked as we drove home. It's a big change. I'm sure, I said, feeling more certain with each passing mile. I need a fresh start somewhere they can't find me easily, somewhere I can build a new life. The emergency calls started that night. First David, then Natalie, then even Tyler and Iris. Voicemails, text messages, emails, all. Pleading confusion, claiming misunderstanding. When I didn't respond, they started showing up at my house. Knocking on my door at all hours, I stayed with Zenaya until the moving van came. We hired a security service to oversee the packing and moving, just in case David or the others tried to interfere. They didn't. but David's car. Drove slowly past Zenaya's house several times during my stay, a silent reminder that this wasn't over. I called a realtor about selling my house on my terms. Once it sold, I put the money into the carefully structured trusts Janet had, set up with clear provisions for my care and specific instructions about who could and could not access the funds. The hardest part was changing my phone number, my email address, essentially disappearing from the life I had known. But it was necessary, as Janet had explained sometimes, the only way to stop financial exploitation is to remove yourself completely from the exploiter's reach. I left no forwarding address, no way for them to find me easily. It felt extreme, but after hearing their true feelings, their true intentions, I knew it was the only way to protect myself, both financially and emotionally. The day I moved into Oakwood Village was bittersweet. Zenaya helped me arrange my furniture, hang my paintings, set up my new studio space. The apartment was smaller than my house, but perfectly adequate for my needs. The east-facing windows in the living room would be perfect for morning painting sessions. "You'll be happy here," Zenaya said as we shared a cup of tea on my new balcony, overlooking a well-tended garden where residents were working among the flower beds. "I can feel it, I think so too," I said, and meant it. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of possibility of a future that belonged to me alone, not defined by what others wanted from me or expected of me. That night alone in my new home, I cried for what I had lost. Not the money or possessions, but the illusion of family, the belief that I was loved for who I was rather than what I could provide. It was a necessary grieving, a letting go of what had never really existed, except in my hopeful imagination. But as I unpacked my painting supplies, setting up my easel by the east-facing window where the morning light would be perfect, I felt something else growing alongside the grief, a quiet determination, a sense of reclaiming my life on my own terms. I was 78 years old, but I wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. My new apartment in the retirement village faces east, perfect for morning painting sessions. The light streams in through the large windows, illuminating my easel and the canvas I'm working on. A landscape of the garden visible from my balcony, the colors vibrant and alive in a way my earlier work never quite achieved. It's been 6 months since I disappeared from my old life. 6 months of rebuilding, of healing, of discovering who I am when I'm not defined by my relationships to others, not as Hector's wife, not as David's mother, not as Iris and Tyler's grandmother, but simply as myself, Vivian Harmon, artist, gardener, survivor. The transition wasn't easy. There were nights I lay awake, questioning my decision, wondering if I had overreacted, if there might have been some innocent explanation for what I'd overheard. But those moments became less frequent as I settled into my new life. As I built new routines, new friendships, new purposes, I reconnected with Milos, who, as it happens, takes a dance class here 3 times a week. Our reunion was awkward at first, me full of apologies for ending things so abruptly, him gracious but wary, but gradually we've rebuilt our connection stronger now for having weathered a separation. We're taking things slowly, enjoying each other's company without pressure or expectations. He makes me laugh, challenges my thinking, appreciates my art in a way few others ever have. Paint, like someone who has seen both beauty and pain. He told me once, studying a landscape I just completed, "There is honesty in your brushstrokes. I've made new friends too." Margaret, a retired English professor who leads the book club. Carlos, a widower hour who tends the community garden and shares his vegetables with anyone who expresses interest. Elaine, a former ballet dancer who now teaches gentle yoga to residents. They know nothing of my past, of the betrayal that led me here. To them, I'm just Vivian, the new resident with the talent for watercolors and a fondness for Earl Grey tea. The financial protections I put in place have proven necessary. David found me eventually. Of course he did. He's my son. He knows my habits, my preferences. He showed up at Oakwood Village one afternoon. Charm turned up to maximum, a bouquet of lies, my favorite. He remembered that at least. "In hand, Mom," he said when I met him in the community center rather than inviting him to my apartment. "We've been so worried. Why did you disappear like that? Why won't you return our calls?" I looked at my son, my only child, the baby I had nursed and nurtured, the boy I had taught to ride a bike and tie his shoes, the man I had helped through college in his first apartment and felt a complex mixture of love and weariness, I think. "You know why, David?" I said quietly. "I don't." He insisted, his expression a perfect mask of confusion and concern. We've been frantic. Natalie's been beside herself. The kids keep asking when they'll see their grandma again. "You forgot to hang up the phone," I said. "Simply, after you asked me for money for Tyler's birthday dinner, I heard everything you, Natalie, the kids, I heard. What you really think of me, What you've been planning. His face went through a remarkable series of transformations. Shock, denial, calculation, and finally a kind of resigned acknowledgement. Mom, you misunderstood. We were just, please don't. I interrupted, my voice steady. Despite the pain lancing through my heart, don't insult my intelligence by lying to me. Now, I heard you call me stupid and weak. I heard your plans for my house, my retirement account, Hector's insurance money. I heard it all. David was silent for a long moment, his hands fidgeting with the cellophane around the lies. We're family, he said finally. As if that explained everything, excused everything. Yes, we are, I agreed, which is why it hurt so much to hear how you really feel about me. Family should be about love, respect, support, not exploitation. We do love you, he protested, but it sounded hollow even to my ears, a reflexive defense rather than a heartfelt declaration. Perhaps I conceded, but not enough to treat me with dignity, with basic human respect. Not enough to see me as a person rather than a resource. What do you want from me, Mom? He asked, an edge of frustration creeping into his voice. An apology, Fen. I'm sorry. We all are. Now can we move past this? Come home? We miss you. I am home, I said, gesturing to the community center around us, the garden visible through the large windows. This is where I live now. As for what I want from you, nothing, David. I don't want or need anything from you. The shock on his face was almost comical. This idea that I might not need him, might not be desperate for his attention and approval, had clearly never occurred to him. You can't be serious, he said. You're just going to cut us off. Your own family. I'm not cutting you off. I clarified, I'm establishing boundaries. If you want a relationship with me, it will be on new terms. Terms that include mutual respect and honesty. No more. Financial requests. No more manipulation. No more treating me like I'm incompetent or stupid. And if we don't agree to these terms, he challenged a hint of the hardness I'd heard in his voice during that fateful phone call, showing through the veneer of concern. Then we don't have a relationship, I said simply. It's your choice. He left without resolving anything. The lilies abandoned on the table between us. I haven't heard from him directly since, though Natalie called. Once her voice syrupy with false concern, asking if I was getting the help I need. Tyler sent a text suggesting we talk about what's really going on. Iris left a voicemail full of tears and recriminations about how I'd abandoned the family. I didn't respond to any of them. The ball is in their court now. If they want a genuine relationship based on love rather than financial gain, they know where to find me. I'm not holding my breath. But I've left the door open a crack, just in case. Sometimes I think about them, David and his family, wonder if they ever truly loved me or if I was always just a resource to be managed, a checkbook with a heartbeat. I hope the grandchildren might someday become better people than their parents, might recognize the emptiness of a life built on taking rather than giving. But I don't wait by the phone anymore. Instead, I focus on the life I'm building here. I've joined a more serious art group, even sold a few paintings at the community's biannual exhibition I've started. Volunteering at the local elementary school, teaching art to third graders who approach their canvases with unself-conscious joy. I've made friends who value me for my company, my conversation, my perspective, not for what I can give them materially. Family isn't about blood, I've learned. It's about respect, love without conditions or price. Tags Zinea visits weekly, bringing gossip and pastries from the bakery. I love Milos, and I have dinner every Saturday, taking turns cooking or trying new restaurants in town. Carlos brings me tomatoes from the garden Margaret loans. Me books she thinks I'll enjoy. Elaine has convinced me to try yoga despite my arthritic knees. This is my family now. Chosen, rather than born into, built on mutual care, rather than obligation or exploitation. It's not what I expected at this stage of life, not the future I planned. When Hector and I sat on our porch discussing retirement, watching David play with his children on our lawn, but it's a good life, a life with dignity and purpose. At 78, I'm finally living for myself, painting my days in colors of my own choosing. The canvas of my remaining years is mine to fill. No longer a background for others' desires, but a work of art in its own right, vibrant with possibility, rich with hard-won wisdom. Each morning as the sun rises and light floods my east-facing windows, I set up my easel, select my brushes, and begin again, stroke by stroke, choice by choice. I reclaim my life, my worth, my joy, and in that act of creation, I find a freedom never knew was possible, the freedom to be fully, unapologetically myself. It's never too late to start over. What new beginning are you contemplating? Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring stories of resilience and transformation. If Vivian's journey touched you, please share this story with someone who might need to hear its message of hope and self-realization.